Capitalism lets entrepreneurs raise money so they can scale up, get their products and services to more people. Where there's free competition, those with the best ideas get more money, and then the best and cheapest products and services spread far and wide. That's why capitalism is great. But then there's crapitalism, crony capitalism. That's where capitalists partner with politicians, and the politicians give your money to capitalists because the politicians know who's most deserving of help, or so they say. I call that corporate welfare, or crapitalism. There are a bunch of government agencies that fuel this crony capitalism. The Small Business Administration gives out grants, so does the Energy Department. You know about their gifts to companies like Solyndra, but the biggest government supporter of business is the Export-Import Bank. Here's what the bank says about itself.
The Export-Import Bank's financial products enable exporters of all sizes to increase their sales, protect against the risks of international trade, and export with confidence.
Export with confidence. That sounds good. Who can object to that? Well, the chairman of the House Finance Committee, for one, Texas Congressman Jeb Hensarling. So, Congressman, why?
Why do I object?
Yes.
Well, it's pretty clear. I think you got it right. You have a fairly clever term. But it is corporate welfare at the end of the day. Now, 1 in 1,000 probably have never heard of the Export-Import Bank. The one who does receives a financial benefit. That's substantially Fortune 500 companies like GE, like Boeing, who could easily finance these things themselves. And so, John, you have the Export-Import Bank claiming they create American jobs, but we just heard testimony that when the Export-Import Bank helps Boeing to sell a jet to Air India, it hurts Delta Airlines. There's thousands of pilots they can't help. We've also heard, for example, from Valero Energy in my state of Texas, when Export-Import Bank helps, for example, GE and others to build an oil refinery in Turkey, it hurts the domestic refining industry. And so on, as one economist has put it, for every job Export-Import creates in exports, they kill an American job domestically. So it's not helping us. And then, John, it's costing the taxpayer money.
But what people can see, what you're up against, is that you can see the jobs created at Boeing, and they have a concentrated interest in lobbying. But maybe the guys at Valero, and you have the Valero example, but the smaller companies, they don't even know what's happening to them.
Well, John, I think I know what the challenges are ahead of me. By being in the midst of this fight, I've probably put, 1,000 lobbyist kids through college. Anybody who can spell lobbyist has now gotten a contract to go lobby in favor of XM. But, it's just not fair, and again, I know a lot of people haven't heard of it, but I got a small business in my district run by a guy named Hal Richards in Terrell, Texas. He says, I export. I don't use XM, and yet it's my taxpayer money that's being sent to countries like China and Russia and the Sudan where there's human rights abuses.
All right, but Congressman, please respond to what the bank says here in its commercial for itself.
With the Export-Import Bank, U.S. exporters from bustling city centers to local family farms can turn once distant business possibilities into reality. International Building Systems of Texas makes prefabricated houses for export. Their buyers range from the swamps of Nigeria to the deserts of Algeria. Naturally, lenders were wary of extending loans because of the countries involved. With our guarantee, lenders felt reassured.
Lenders felt reassured. Isn't that wonderful?
Well, what we hear, John, is that once lenders know that it's the taxpayers' money that's on the line, they quit doing their due diligence. They don't care about the risk because it's not on their balance sheet, it's on the taxpayers' balance sheet. Last I looked, the national debt is $17 trillion and increasing. I keep a national debt clock going in our committee room. I don't think the taxpayer wants this on their balance sheet. And again, this is all about kind of the Washington insider economy versus the Main Street competitive economy. I mean, the face of XM is going to be some small business in my state. But the true beneficiaries, again, are Fortune 500 companies that could easily finance this themselves. And instead, they're financing, a lobby effort to keep this thing going, and you can't even say they create net new jobs. And we just had testimony from the Congressional Budget Office that if XM would use Main Street accounting, GAAP accounting, what we call fair value accounting, they're losing money for the taxpayer. And it's not right, it's not fair, it doesn't create jobs, it costs taxpayer money. We ought to end the corporate welfare, and yet my Democratic friends say the only way we can help exports is with subsidies. You know, why don't we have a regulatory...
Your Republican friends, too.
Well, regrettably, a number of those. We are helping to inform their discretion and their knowledge at the moment. But why don't we have a free enterprise alternative? We have the highest corporate tax rate of any industrialized nation in the world. If we want, quote unquote, a level playing field, let's bring down the corporate tax rate.
Thank you, Congressman Henserling. As you
Okay.
say, I agree with you. Only free enterprise is moral, part of your argument for this. But now
Yes.
let's hear from the other side. Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman is also on the Finance Committee. Congressman, you just listened to your committee chair. He's wrong?
Well, John, I know you oppose reauthorizing the XM Bank, and so does Jeb. So you have two people on one side, one on the other. But
Yep.
the argument for extending the XM Bank is more than twice as good, so it is a fair fight. The fact is that we don't live in the novels of Ayn Rand. You can live in The Fountainhead, you can live in Atlas Shrugged. There's no XM Bank in those books. But also in those books, Germany doesn't have an XM Bank, Japan doesn't have an XM Bank, China doesn't have one, and neither does South Korea. What we're talking about here is unilateral military disarmament. Now, I watch Fox a lot, and I see Democrats accused of unilateral disarmament. This is the first time that Republicans are so anxious to engage in it. If we don't promote exports, buyers are smart, and they'll go not necessarily for the best product, but for the best financing.
So
and this
if
is
other
Airbus
countries are
versus Boeing.
jumping off a bridge, we should jump off a bridge? Isn't this
other
what our parents
companies
warned
are-
us against?
This isn't jumping off a bridge. Germany, for example, has an XM Bank 3 times as large as ours.
It
Their
just steals
exports,
from taxpayers.
Three times as large as ours.
Steals 3
Their-
times as much.
Every industrialized country in the world says this is the way to get jobs. We've got the largest trade deficit in the world. Germany has one of the largest surpluses in the world. Which do you want to imitate?
If this
Do you
is
want
the way to
we have
get jobs, why are you so cheap? Why don't we triple the size of the Exim Bank and subsidize all kinds of people? Why don't we
first of
pay
all,
to
it's not
sell ice to
subsidized.
Eskimos?
I don't think we can make money by selling ice to Eskimos. The Exim Bank is not subsidized. It subsidizes the Treasury. It subsidizes the loss of in the Treasury for all those loopholes that
So
you
shouldn't
want
we
to
make
keep
it
going
bigger?
with. I think the Exim Bank should get a bit bigger. I don't think it has to get that. And ultimately, though,
But if
what
it's
we
so
need
good,
to do
why
is
not make it much
John,
bigger?
what we need to do is negotiate with the Europeans to shrink theirs and ours simultaneously. The only way you get disarmament is you go into the talks with arms. You don't disarm first, sing kumbaya, and then beg the other side to disarm. Not even George McGovern proposed that in arms control, and I don't think you should propose it when it comes to controlling the efforts of foreign governments to subsidize their exports.
So
or to
that's your
promote
goal.
their
If we
exports.
keep ours, maybe we can get rid of theirs, and then we could get rid of the Exim Bank?
We are in negotiations now to downscale and eliminate export authorities of this type. They'll be difficult negotiations.
When you help Boeing sell a plane to a foreign airline, you do give that airline a special break, and that hurts Americans who work for, say, Delta. Here's what Delta's CEO said at your hearing.
Well, Delta.
A prime example is Air India, a government-owned, government-subsidized airline that drove us out of the marketplace with $1 billion of Exim Bank financing. That cost about 1,000 jobs.
Those loans are actually subsidies for big corporations.
Backed by taxpayers.
That's right, Johnny. And when it comes to picking winners and losers, who has more experience than Big G?
Big G is big government, of course, and the group that made that cartoon is upset that government's big spending steals opportunities from younger people like them. But picking winners is something lots of Americans want their elected politicians to do. Someone needs to decide which industries deserve America's support, right? And we're busy. We can't analyze every company to decide which is worthy. That's why we elect politicians. What's wrong with this logic? Let's ask the economist who Congressman Hensarling sometimes quotes when he argues against the Ex-Im Bank. That's Don Boudreaux of George Mason University. So I have a life. I can't decide what companies are better and ought to get some export support. It's government's job.
No, it's the free market's job. The direction of resources is determined by how consumers spend their money and how investors invest. And competition sorts it all out. It does it much better, and it does it with a lot less favoritism than the political process could ever possibly do it.
But the politicians, both parties are citing, look at all these people who have been helped, these jobs that have been created.
Yeah, you can point to the jobs that have been created. What you don't see are the jobs that have not been created. You cannot create a job over here by spending more money over here, because without, at the same time, costing jobs over here because you're taking money from here and you're moving it over here. It's easy to see that.
It's easy to see the gains.
It's easy to see the gains, but you miss the losses. And these people pretend as if the losses don't exist because they're pointing to what you can see, but what you don't see is just as real, even if it's invisible.
And what you don't see is the money taken from people in taxes where they invest less.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or the overseas firm, which now has this discount, and the American firm loses the business.
That's right. You have some American firms who are not able to get started. You have some American firms that are not able to expand. You can point to the firms in America that expand and sell more, mostly Boeing, by the way. Hardly a small little firm that needs Uncle Sam's help.
But they'll lose the business to this European company which subsidizes even more.
Well, they surely will lose some business if we kill the Ex-Im Bank. But other American firms will gain business. And the resources will be allocated better. Consumers' manner of spending money will direct how the resources get spent and what happens, not politicians.
The cartoon video, The Cronies, points out that the Ex-Im Bank has been doling out favors for 80 years.
You really want to turn your back on tradition? It's given a helping hand out to some great American companies, like Enron, Solyndra, and Boeing. So that no vote could mean fewer contributions to your re-election campaign.
Gee, I hadn't thought of that.
That's a big part, that those companies hire lobbyists, give money to the politicians who support it.
Yeah, it's crony capitalism. Pure and simple, crony capitalism.
Crapitalism. It's my word.
Yeah, I like that. I like that word. Look, what the Ex-Im Bank does is pay foreigners to consume our products. Why should we pay foreigners to consume our products? And that's what it does. That's what it boils down to.
Because it creates jobs, and they say it hasn't cost America a penny. In fact, the bank returned $1.5 billion to the Treasury over the past 5 years.
Yeah, so it says. So the Ex-Im Bank says. The CBO did a study just last month in which it found, using better accounting methods, that in fact the Ex-Im Bank probably lost about $2 billion.
But they get to use these phony accounting methods.
Yeah, if a private company uses kind of accounting methods, they would be sued for fraud.
Now, other companies subsidize exports.
Other countries do subsidize exports, but your mother, when you were young, probably said, look, if other kids jump off the bridge, would you do it? Those subsidies hurt those economies. Why should we then say, we're going to hurt ourselves just as much as you're hurting yourself? That's what those subsidies are about. We're inflicting wounds on ourselves because other countries are doing the same thing to their economies.
Now, as you mentioned, Boeing gets half the money, by far, most of the money. Right down the list is GE, and here's what General Electric says about the bank. Actually, they won't talk to us, but they made this commercial.
The president wants to double exports. He should double the size of the bank.
So that the U.S. government can really go out there and support U.S. companies as they seek to compete abroad to help support American exports and American workers.
At the end of that, it says, your imagination at work, or something like that. GE, this is imagination.
Well, they should use their imagination and try to imagine the jobs that are not created. Imagine the products that are not produced. Imagine the consumers in America who are poorer because their tax monies are being taken to be spent in ways that they don't choose, but the way that politicians in Washington choose. Imagine that. That's not a good thing to imagine.
those people, 300 million of them, they don't each have a lobbyist making the case.
That's exactly right. They don't. But Boeing does, and GE does, and big corporations do.
But the politicians aren't just whores. They believe in this. They say, this is my job, to support American business.
Well, they may, but then they're wrong. I mean, they're economically mistaken. I don't doubt it's good for their jobs, but they're economically mistaken.